Sitting down doing a video today, not so much on the technical aspect of anything really, more just on the 4600 race program for the Ford Bronco. And I guess I wanted to do this video because I think it's a really interesting race program. I was fortunate enough to be part of that program. It's got some great drivers, and it stirred up a lot of controversy in the off-road community, I think. Maybe not so much in the community, but in the off-road racing world. And I'll touch base on why I make a comment like that. But the 4600 program started years ago, and Ford essentially, hats off to them, was an OE that decided that they, when rolling out the Bronco, they wanted to validate this vehicle and this platform in racing. And to their credit, they put a lot of time and money and resources into this program. And I want to stipulate that time and money, and I'll go into a lot of detail about that because it's not nearly what you think, and a lot of the information that we hear about, I know firsthand, is just not true. So we were fortunate enough to be on this race program for one reason and one reason only. They wanted to run a portal on the Bronco to be able to get ground clearance and hope that, and essentially make that independent front suspension work well in rocks. They weren't going to do a long travel because long travel just lacks ground clearance at the wheel. And the only way to ever get around that is with a portal. So it was pushed originally by Lauren Healy and I think heavily also by Brad Lovell. And Brad said, hey, we need to run a portal in the front. We can stick with a solid axle in the rear, but we want that portal in front just to give us the ground clearance. And Brad's a very accomplished Ultra 4 driver. He transitioned while still racing Ultra 4, went over to short course, and actually won championships in short course before coming back to Ultra 4. He's won in Baja. He's one of these unassuming, quiet drivers who I just call a wheelman. Like, Brad knows what the car is doing, and he has the resume to back it up. Brad also has an interesting, I guess, role at Ford in that he's kind of one of the official test drivers for Ford. And I know it sounds like a cool job, it's because it is, but Brad is in that position because of his ability behind the wheel. And there's very few people that I would say have the ability to feel nuances in a car and then elaborate on those in person to adequately articulate what the vehicle's doing. It's one thing to feel something, that's difficult. It's even harder to be able to communicate precisely what you're feeling. So Brad has a very high standing at Ford, and he initially lobbied for, hey man, we need to put a portal on this Bronco. So there was myself and one other company that was considered originally in the talks about, well, do we go with 74 weld portal? Do we go with the ID design one? And I don't know any of the details around the selection process, but we ended up essentially being selected, and it was then kind of off to the races. And the people involved in this, obviously, it's Ford Performance, Brad Lovell, Geyser Brothers, so Rick Geyser, and then Triton Engineering, Igor up there. And so we would have essentially weekly phone calls, I think it was twice a week, where it would be Brad, myself, Igor, Rick, and several guys from Ford Performance would meet and discuss the program. And so Rick was going to be building the trucks. Igor was designing suspension. I was in charge of portal. And then all of us kind of combined to give our 2 cents, our knowledge, and our experience to try to make the race program the success that it really turned out to be and still is. So the development process, like anything, took longer than everybody wanted. And originally, Ford wanted to race these Broncos in 2021 at King of the Hammers. And while they almost were going to be ready, but it was debatable, they actually waited, which was a really good decision in my opinion, to race them the following year. Now, the first race that the Bronco actually ever saw, it was just Brad Lovell racing 4600 class in San Felipe. Down in Mexico, they had an Ultra 4 race there. I was down there partly helping out Jason Shear, partly wanting to be there for the debut of this 4600 Bronco. And then I also got roped into co-driving for Bailey Cole during that race. So we get down to Baja and Brad is kind of prepping, and there's a big team from Ford Performance there, and I hear on the back end, I don't know that at the time Brad was privy to this conversation, but there was, you know, kind of the talk that, man, we better win this. And it was interesting because, you know, hearing that, you go like, oh man, like no pressure. So Ford had really high expectations with this, and I can tell you that I think everybody involved in the program did. Now, Brad goes out and qualifies first overall in class in 4600 and actually qualified fairly top in 4400, even though that's not a class he's running based on time. And race day rolls around, and I didn't see Brad. I saw him take off, and then I had to get ready because I was jumping in the car with Bailey Cole. And so we race that day, and Brad ends up finishing first place overall by like 18 minutes in that class. And so it's a success in that sense that very first race, come out, take first overall in qualifying, take first overall on the podium, everybody's happy. And that was kind of the expectation, but let's be super clear, in racing, you can have the best car out there, and if your prep is not perfect, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it, it doesn't matter how much time you throw at it, prep is what wins races. So I'll get back to a bit of the 4600 program. Ford basically built 3 vehicles, picked top drivers in the class to run them, and put a fair money and effort at this program. And so this is where I hear the critique, and I agree with it to a certain point. So a major OE comes into our sport, putting money at it and putting good drivers at it. That doesn't make a winning program. There's so many times through racing history that people have chucked money at things and it doesn't lead to success. I think one of the main things that is a misconception about the Ford 4600 program is who's actually maintaining the vehicles. And, you know, we heard comments that, well, of course they're winning because Ford's throwing a ton of money at this stuff. The first race that they did, Ford handled a lot of the prep with another third-party company that they had a working relationship with. After that, all of the prep work, all of the, you know, everything that goes into these vehicles and the success or failure of this program was on the shoulders of the individual drivers. So those drivers are Bailey Cole, and Bailey Cole and Jason Shear were gonna team up, and I watched Jason unselfishly kind of take a back seat and let Bailey lead. I thought that was really cool, and hats off to him. Then you have Vaughn Gittin Jr. and Lauren Healy teaming up, and then you have Brad Lovell racing another one of these. And the success of that vehicle is really ultimately on the shoulder of who's prepping the vehicle, because winning prep wins races. And that's not Ford doing that. That's these individual guys. So let's talk about, they roll out to KOH in 2022. They take first, second, and third overall. Those cars are not maintained by Ford as a factory-backed race team. Those are individual drivers. Bailey's prepping a lot of his stuff. Brad does all of his own prep in-house literally at his house in Colorado. Lauren and Vaughn have a team of guys behind them that are stellar prep guys, good mechanics. But when you hear the comment that, well, of course they're going to win because, you know, Ford throws money at it. One, Ford didn't actually put that much money in the grand scheme of things at the program. And two, the success of a program is not based on how much money you throw at it. But let's talk briefly about the vehicle. And I'll say this with confidence, this vehicle has been more dominant in this off-road racing class than any vehicle in the history of off-road racing. So they've taken first, second, and third in every qualifying that they've entered in, and they've taken first, second, and third in every race they've entered in, with the exception of two. One where there was a tire moved 50 feet into the race course. Vaughn Gittin hits that tire during the final I don't remember where they were racing, rolls the vehicle, he DNF'd. Lauren had one mechanical failure during one of the races. That was the only race that the 4600 Bronco has not taken first in. And to look at a success of a program like this, you also have to go, okay, well, what did Ford actually do in this program? Like, what were the major changes that they did? Well, 4600 up until this point, you saw a couple private teams that had an independent suspension, but that class was essentially dominated by solid axles. And then Ford shows up, and let's talk about the build of these Broncos. How close to stock are they? And everybody goes, well, it's stock class, but there's nothing stock on that vehicle. Okay, let's break this down. So that vehicle, because I'm very familiar with the suspension and I'm very familiar with the whole build, that's a Bronco chassis that runs a lower A-arm where it uses factory pivot points. It's not a long travel kit. It runs a Fox 2.5-inch coilover in the front. It runs a Fox 2.5-inch coilover in the rear. This is not an internal bypass shock. It's nothing fancy. It's literally a 2.5-inch shock that they took off the shelf and spent time tuning. It pulls 10, 11 inches of travel in the front, maybe 14 in the rear. Don't quote me on the numbers, but it's not astronomical. The rear shock is still attached to the rear axle. It's not on a trailing arm setup. It's a basic Dana 60 rear from Dynatrac that anybody could buy and put in their Bronco. The upper A-arm on the front suspension was changed to a J-arm. They cut the factory pivots on it and welded new ones on. Nothing crazy on that, and in fact, you could also even argue that a J-arm in this application has additional leverage over it than an A-arm. 1-inch uniballs, again, this is standard stuff that you can get on any long travel kit or replacement arm kit out on the market. The major change that they did was they went with a Howe power steering rack. And part of the reason for that is, at the time, there were no steering solutions for Bronco. We knew that it was going to be an issue. We personally had not developed anything for the steering, and we never even considered it based on the timeline, so they threw in a Howe steering rack. So other than that, it's Bronco chassis. They put a roll cage in it. They have Motec in this for sensors and data acquisition, but that doesn't win you races. So when people say that this is a crazy program, I go, It's a 2.5-inch shock with a roll cage in it and minor suspension differences. What's the major difference? Obviously, I'm biased. They run a portal on the front of that thing. And that portal it's a 1.45 ratio. It's the same as, it's essentially the same portal that we've run on other race applications. It's not much different than our bolt-on stuff, but for this, at this time, we hadn't even touched any of the bolt-on. So the dominance of this vehicle in this class with this platform, I hear the critique that it's due to Ford putting a ton of money at it. I'd argue it's not, and here's why. You've got multiple other Broncos that are now built, and I know the budget of them, and it's cheaper than the budget of a lot of the other 4600s out there. So it's not like this is unattainable from a race standpoint, and the only way this happens is because an OE. I think what we need to recognize as an off-road community is what Ford did in sinking resources into this program is really beneficial for the entire sport, because having an OE recognize that they want to be a part of Ultra 4 essentially is going to push the entire industry forward. And I got to give Ford credit in being willing to throw their hat in the ring. And it's really the drivers and their pit crews that have made this program so successful. And I was sitting at King of the Hammers last year, 2023, and I was standing next to a gentleman very high up at Ford Performance, and I leaned over to him and I said, this has to be one of the most successful race programs that Ford has put forth. Like, at that point in time, they had so in 2022, Lauren Healy takes first overall, Brad Lovell takes second overall, Bailey Cole takes third overall. In 2023, it goes, Lauren takes first, I guess it was a repeat. Bailey third, and Lauren second. And then in 2022, Brad Lovell wins the championship. In 2023, Lauren Healy wins the championship. This has been the most successful race program that Ford has actually ever put forth. And I would argue one of the most successful race programs in motorsports history. And it's not because everybody had unlimited budgets. We were constrained by a lot of things. It's just the amount of effort that these individual race teams have put forth. And I'll still contend to this day that, like, I think the Bronco platform is phenomenal. I think that it has so much potential. And now you're seeing that if you want to be competitive and win in 4600, you're building a Bronco. I'd love to see Toyota enter into the ring. It would be really cool to see Jeep throw resources at this stuff, but it's going to take more than money to make something like this successful, and hats off to Ford for doing that. So I just kind of wanted to make a quick video on my insights and my knowledge based on being part of such a historic program. And obviously I'm biased. I think that our components are a big contributor to that. We've got probably 20 races under our belt in the 4600 stuff. Not a single failure on any portal, on any of that application. And that's really also a testament to good prep by these guys, good driving, and just the right pieces to the puzzle. So hopefully we gave you a little bit of info into that 4600 program. If you find that interesting, want more of this stuff, throw it in the comments, like, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks.